Welcome all of you to this very exciting session. Thank you to the panelists for being here. All the introductions have been done, so half my work is done for me. I'm just going to jump right into the session. I just want to start by saying I'm really delighted and honored to be a part of this Bollywood narrative session, where we are going to talk about Bollywood, but we will go much beyond Bollywood to talk about connections between the written word, the screen, how things sort of travel across art forms, across languages. And I'm really excited to be here with the three people who have inspired me greatly. There's Vishal sir, whose movies have, of course, inspired all of us. And as a literature graduate myself, who was obsessed with Shakespeare at one point, I really grew up just completely mesmerized by the way you adapted them to the Indian context. I still, when I introduce your work to other people, I still talk about how you convert Shakespeare's witches in the Macbeth into police officers who are astrologers in the Indian context. And I think that's one of the most brilliant strokes of genius on screen. Kunal Basu, a writer, I actually saw your session in 2008 at the Jaipur Lit Fest, where you were in conversation with Aparna Sen, who went on to making a movie from your story, The Japanese Wife. And I remember that session very vividly. It was a brilliant session, and I watched the movie, I read the book after, so it's really, really a privilege for me to be here with you today. And then there's Singh Choudhary, who is a translator, writer, journalist, novelist, now screenwriter, scriptwriter, has been a friend and mentor for many, many years. So it's always a delight to be in a session with you. I'm going to jump right in and start talking about adaptations, because I think that's one thing that binds all of you together. And maybe one by one, you can all come in and talk about your experience with adaptations. Maybe Vishalji, we can start with you. You've always been involved in adaptations of some form or the other. Of course, we all know about Shakespeare adaptations. There's, of course, the Ruskin Bond adaptations into Saat Khoon Maaf for the others. There's now you're working on Agatha Christie. You've also done Charan Singh Pathik into Pataka. There's A.K. Ramanujam, which turned into the opera. You've also been involved in some adaptations with Gulzar for Alice in Wonderland and Jungle Book, at least in the music sort of way. So I just wanted to know what draws you to this process, and what are the challenges that you've particularly faced in sort of creating these adaptations? So I'll hand over to you.
I think what draws me is actually the necessity and a little intelligence, because I know that I can't be that genius, which is lying over there. So it's that you understand the kind of depth you have as a writer or as a person or as a creative person. And when you write on your own and you can see the difference, of course I can never be a Shakespeare. And his work is lying out there, out of copyright, available. So it started from there. And then I started looking for, more work. Like I did one Brecht also. Mr. Puntila and his man Mati as Matru ki Bidli ka Mandola. So it actually started from there. And then this quest, it never stopped. And then Ruskin Bond. And the challenges, I think the main challenge is in adaptation is that how to match the original work's genius, and how to come in parallel with that, and the people are going to judge you for that. Fortunately for me, what happened when I was doing my first adaptation of that was my second film, Maqbool, which was based on Macbeth. At that time, I thought that nobody's going to take me seriously, and the kind of, the advice and the reaction I was getting from my fellow producers in Mumbai at that time, that they used to tell me that don't put Shakespeare's name on your script, you will not get finance, because people will think it's something so literary that it will not be entertaining. So that kind of feeling. So I thought it will not be seen beyond India or beyond Mumbai. So I took whatever liberty I wanted to take with the Bard's work. That way, I was not burdened with, his name and his work and his personality. And later when, it was the kind of reception it got worldwide, I really used to wonder that, I took this kind of liberty, these things could have gone wrong. But that's where I got this mantra that, that I have to be very honest to the soul of the work rather than the text of the work. So that's what, that remains the challenge, however conscious you are, or you may be, but you may go against the soul of the original material.
It's amazing that you went from not caring finance to that to, in yesterday's session, you called Shakespeare your fixed deposit. So you said that whenever I don't have something to do, I'm just going to go back to it. It's always
That's what I earned, that's what I earned. Yeah.
No, that's an amazing journey. Thank you. Kunal, I'll move to you. Your short story, Japanese Wife, as we discussed, was turned into a film. So I just wanted to understand what was your experience, just sort of, about this connection between the written word and celluloid. What did you think of this process of adaptation?
Thank you. I have to say, Bollywood is a mysterious place. It's a mysterious place from the point of view of a fiction writer like myself. The journey of a book from print to celluloid goes through very difficult terrains, and oftentimes the journey is curtailed. So let me give you the example of how The Japanese Wife happened and some other thoughts. So I met Aparna Sen at a party in Oxford. I knew her by reputation, but I had never met her. Okay. And she had read a few of my earlier novels, and at the party we started a conversation, and she said, I would love to make a love story. Except that all love stories have been written and done, right? Romeo and Juliet and all of that, etc. And I said, no, hang on. I think I've written a love story which is very different. Now, I wasn't pitching a story for adaptation. I was having a conversation. And she said, okay, go on, tell me. So in a room full of people, in about 5 minutes, I told her the story of The Japanese Wife. And she said, oh, have you sold it to anyone? Now, at that point, I didn't know what selling a story meant. I mean, I thought one sold one story to a publisher, right? And she said, no. Have you given film rights to anyone? I said, no. And then, of course, she read the story, and it took on a life of its own. Right from the beginning, I was very clear that the film is her work, not mine. Okay? And so before I passed on the rights of The Japanese Wife, I had a very long conversation with her to make sure that our sensibilities were on the same page. That I saw the characters, that she saw the characters in a very similar light as I did. Okay? And also the progression of the narrative. And once I was convinced of that, she said, well, will you write the screenplay? I said, absolutely not. Okay. And the reason for that was, see, in my other life, I'm a professor. So if I tell a student, look, this is a very good essay, now I want you to correct it, I want you to make some additions and changes and resubmit. Usually the second submission turns out to be rubbish. Because by then, the person has exhausted his or her passion. So once I've written The Japanese Wife, I've exhausted my passion for this story. Okay? And now it's the passion of the filmmaker. So she took it on from there, and we would have some conversations as she was writing the screenplay. I would provide my thoughts, but as far as adaptations go, it was really her work. But let me just finish by coming back to the point about adaptations. The gentleman sitting to the right of me is an exception, in the following sense, that he is an avid reader and a sensitive reader of literature. My limited engagements or interactions with Bollywood tells me that people don't read, let alone a novel or a 4-page abstract. There is a term which is popular in Bollywood, Vishal, I'm sure you know about that. It's called a one-liner. Yeah? So you're talking to a director or a producer, and they will say, what's the one-liner for your story? And normally eloquent, I'm usually struck silent. Okay. So the challenge of adaptation from the perspective of a writer of fiction remains.
That's a really interesting perspective. So one-liner is like an elevator pitch, is it? It's like the equivalent of an elevator pitch. Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to Anu now. I know you've been a part of writing some of the most brilliant shows that have come out recently, Arya, Grahan, Scoop, which I just watched this week. And even some of the films that you have worked on as a writer, they've all been adaptations of some form, including the very exciting Hindi adaptation of The Great Indian Kitchen, the great Malayalam film that you're working on now. I'm really excited to watch that. So what does it take for you to create fresh characters out of existing material? What are the sort of challenges that you have to face with that?
Unlike the other two geniuses here, I am somebody who actually is the second step into the process, where somebody already has identified that material, which takes away the responsibility of looking at a material. I mean, I'm a I am very good at, I call myself Gadha Majdoor, which literally means somebody who can do the donkey's work very well. I'm a great rewriter. So all these material actually, all these shows and films came to me purely because of the background that I'd had in writing, publishing, translating, journalism. And there was, in some sense, there was a vision. I can't deny that. There was always a vision of the filmmaker that I was working with, whether this was Hansal Mehta, Ram Advani. So all I had to do was work on the characters, because the context also in some way was defined. They knew what they wanted to do with the story, which also in a way made my work more challenging, because then that means you have to bring in your own exclusive voice, because screenwriting in its process is so collaborative. There's so many stakeholders. There are other people in the writer's room. So how do you keep your, in that sense, voice clear? How do you make your characters stand out in a way who become the characters that everybody else in the writer's room, including your director, will be excited to work with? So, and then came my little bit of experience of being a journalist and a writer. And the other thing that I'm extremely proud of is that I go back to my roots all the time. I live in Mumbai, but I keep going back to Bihar, which is where I'm from. So which means I'm constantly engaging with real people. Literally a lot of engagement, probably 6 months of my life in a year. If I'm writing 6 months, I'm really just on the field talking to a lot of people. All of those characters are defined, they come from these real life people. These constant interactions. So one conversation that I'll have just before the session will just stay, and then something that you take from there. So yes, I'm not a very good reader of literature probably, but the only thing that I have as a strong skill is observation, and that helps me create characters. So for example, Great Indian Kitchen, which has had, it's set in North Indian context, so I didn't have to go anywhere. I just had to look within my home, and there were so many women around me who just gave me so much to just make that character so much more layered and nuanced. So that's where all these characters come from, especially female characters.
Thank you. I think you said you're not a reader of literature, but you're a writer of literature. So I don't think that's completely true. But you talked about your female characters, and I do want to come back to that. I think one of the most sort of nuanced and layered portrayals of female characters have been in some of these shows, and I think that's credits to you. But I'll move on to my next question to sort of everyone here. And that is that all of you have multiple lives that you lead. So you talked about your life as a writer, translator, novelist, many things, screenwriter now. And Kunal, you talked about your life as a professor of marketing, and you're also a bilingual author. Vishalji, you started off as a music director. You compose, you write dialogues, you direct films. So I'm just curious to understand, how do these multiple lives that you lead interact with each other? What do they sort of, how do they influence each other? How do they sort of play into each other? Maybe we can start with you, Vishalji. Kunal, why don't you begin?
I keep telling journalists who ask this question that I hope my fiction is not managerial and my management is not fictitious. Yeah. Actually, there is not really a subterranean connection between the two. What my academic life has given me is the flexibility to travel to many different parts of the world. So I find it difficult when people say, "Where are you from?" Well, obviously, anthropologically, I'm from India. But I have lived in so many different parts of the world that I have to remind myself oftentimes that what is my exact location in terms of the matrix that I carry in my head. So the academic life has made that possible. It has exposed me to a very wide range of people. Okay, because I'm a professor of business, it's not simply students in the classroom, but also practicing executives in many different parts of the world, in New York, as well as in Jakarta, or in China, or in Cuba. And so I think it has added on to the repertoire of what then manifests itself or could have manifested itself in terms of my writing. What it has certainly done is that it has led to what I would loosely call global fiction. So while my characters are rooted in this book, my most recent book, they're all rooted in Bihar and UP and Madhya Pradesh, and I'm not from there. Okay, I'm from Bengal, but it's, all my characters are from North India. But also equally, there are characters and parts of my story that are set in China, in Portugal, in Africa, and many other places. So I think that's been the kind of connection, not a direct connection, but a subterranean fertilization of the imagination that has led to my writing.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Anu, would you like to come in first?
I just keep it very, very simple. I just identify the skill set each form that I have had the good fortune of engaging with gives me. So as a journalist, you fact check, you do your research, you go on the field, you report. That's what I borrow from there. As a translator, you learn to detach yourself because you're transcreating. I mean, there is a great work which is already there and you're translating it into another language. So while you're being true to the source material, you also have to find the right rhythm and the meter in which the translation will happen. So it is creation in a way, but without the burden of actually recreating the whole thing all over again. So it helps you step back and look at the source material very differently, not just as a reader, but also as a writer. So then that's what I borrow from there. As a screenwriter, the greatest life skill that I have learned is collaboration. I always thought I could only write in solitude, but it's such a great experience to be in some of the most vibrant writers' rooms with some of the most very, very bright minds, fresh ideas, and how do you actually bring all of that together in a way that it becomes a unified voice? So collaboration is something that I learned from there. The art of letting go is something that inherently writing teaches you. So that's another skill set that I learned from combining all of these forms.
Collaboration is a really good one. Thank you. Vishalji, would you like to?
I think in a normal day-to-day life, we live multiple lives. So not just the creativity, like I'm reminded of a couplet that I'll say it in Urdu, then you can translate it for me, that Shauhar, Beta, Baap, Sawali और खुदा. शौहर, बेटा, बाप, सवाली और खुदा एक दिन में कितने किरदार निभाने हैं. या husband, a son, Sawali, what we'll call Sawali, one who asks the God and the God yourself, how many characters will I play in a day? And we keep changing our roles in the morning and sometimes, and what you don't let go of, the child within you who has not grown, who is still like 8-10 years old, you are always carrying him within you. So I think for me, my creativity stems from there. I don't know where my composer stops and my writer comes, where my writer stops, my director comes. It flows so naturally into each other. And a composer, the one thing which doesn't flow very naturally within me is the producer. I'm never able to make money. So, yeah. So I'm always short of money like everyone else. But rest of the things come so naturally to me that I'm not able to bifurcate myself that, how do I do this? Because it just happens. If I try to do it, it will never happen, but it just happens.
Thank you. That was a very beautiful couplet. Thank you for that. There's another question that I wanted to ask about this sort of journeys that you make in your minds and that comes across in your work. I think the beauty of all of your works comes from a very deep engagement with the multiple languages that you live with. I think all of you are very, very fluently bilingual, maybe multilingual. And I wanted to talk about that. All of you sort of write bilingually and work bilingually. You're, Hindi for both of you and Bengali for you, Kunal. So I wanted to understand the process of this kind of linguistic journey and translation that's constantly happening in your minds and that comes across in the artworks that you produce, whether it's books or movies or anything at all that you're working on. So can we sort of talk a little bit about that?
The first thing that is coming to my mind, but Indians are bilingual. I mean, I don't think I have any
That's true.
specific skill set, but yes, by training, one did work on both the languages, in fact, 3 languages. So it helps immensely. A lot of stories. So if you understand the language, it's not just the language that you understand, it's the culture. It's, there's so many other aspects of the language that you're borrowing from. And that I see as a great advantage, and especially in the generation, the world that we live in. It's unfortunate that a lot of people that we are working with, I mean, I am very ashamed to say that even though primarily I'm a Hindi writer, I submit my screenplays in English. And I should not be doing that. And I write my dialogues because that's what the industry norm is, in Roman script and not in Devanagari, which really pains me. But, you know, I'm told that 500 people for whom you're creating the roadmap for the script, they do not know the language. They can't read Hindi. So, but I wish there was more engagement language, because we, you know, language, which a lot of other industries do. Marathi, people write their scripts in Marathi. Bengali, I'm sure they write in Bengali. Other Indian languages, everybody's working in their inherent language. We are constantly translating. So it's just so strange that I'm thinking in Hindi, then writing it in English, and then I'm translating it back into Hindi. But that's how it is. But the advantage that you have is that you're bilingual, so then you just can communicate certain things in a better way, better than your peers. And just by association that I personally, that I have with literature, Hindi literature especially, it just becomes so innate to what you do all the time. So then some very basic things like dialogue writing, in that sense, just come a little bit more naturally to you. It's more seamless, more effortless, because you know the meter and the rhythm very inherently. I mean, just purely because of the engagement with both the languages. So that has been my experience as a screenwriter, as a bilingual writer.
Thank you. Kunal, are there any challenges that you face while writing in both languages?
I do not translate.
Yeah.
I believe that I'm fortunate enough to have grown up in a world, and a person of my generation, and I have 2 literary streams flowing within me. And it's not really about writing grammatically correctly in either language. It's about engaging in a literary sense with the story that I want to tell. So let me give you some examples. The Japanese wife is set in the Sundarbans, right? And it couldn't be more Bengali than the Sundarbans, right? The story was written in English. Why? Because when the story appeared in my mind, the first line of the story came to me. She sent him kites. She sent him kites. And I knew I had to write the story in English. Equally, I have a novel in Bengali called Tejoshini or Shabnam, which has now been translated and published by Picador. It's called The End Game. It is set in Iraq after the death of Saddam Hussein in the theater of war. And it's about 2 Indian women, a journalist and a prostitute, who find themselves as friends, who encounter each other, who meet accidentally in the theater of war, and they become friends. The friendship between 2 women. Okay. Now, my agent here had oftentimes said, well, you should write this novel in English. It's a global novel, right? 2 Indian women, Iraq, war, the American army, and all of that. I couldn't. Because when I was researching for this novel, when the story appeared to me, I was researching for this novel, I met a whole lot of young girls who had been trafficked from Bengal. And when I went to interview them, and I went to talk to them and find out about their very difficult and tragic life journeys, the story appeared to me in Bengali. Okay? I never translate. My publishers in both Bengali and English have said, well, why don't you translate your own works? I said, actually, I hate translations. Okay? Unless somebody else do that. Okay? So when I'm in my English stream, I'm immersed in my English stream. When I'm in my Bengali stream, I'm immersed in my Bengali stream.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Vishalji, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, I'll say what Anu is. I'll second that, because we are actually the problem or the beauty in India is, like there's so many Indias within an India, and the dialect changes, the language changes. We have so many, languages. But then what happens in Bollywood, because the Bollywood narratives we are talking about, that we only converse in English and we make Hindi films. So this is really sad, and like I am a Hindi person, I am a Hindi bhashi, and I love to read in Hindi in my own language. But when you find an actor who says, I want my script dialogues written in Devanagari, you feel emotional, feel like crying. Oh my God, you found someone who can read Devanagari. Otherwise, everyone is like they want to read it in Roman, and the effect of that is so severe and so deep that we are losing the purity of the language, because this some nuances like nukta of Urdu. How do you pronounce that, and how do you write that? First, Devanagari is such a scientific language that you speak what you write. No other language gives you that kind of confidence that you can't go wrong. You can write anything and there's no change of pronunciation. But because we are now writing our scripts, I still write with my hand and in Devanagari, and then in fact the final draft, the software on which we type our script. So for very long, I saw, you can type your dialogues in Spanish and French. They didn't have Devanagari. So yeah, because I did that campaign. Every day I used to ask all my assistants to send an email to Final Draft, please include Devanagari, please include Devanagari, and finally they did. So now
That's
you
brilliant.
can type, instructions can be in English that, he went there and he saw someone, you can write in English. But when we are conversing, we have to converse in our own language. But, we are losing so much nuances and detail. And now even the actors, if you find someone who can actually pronounce khuda, or who can say ghalat, or who can actually put right nuktas, they actually make fun of you that, oh, here comes the linguistic person, who is trying to correct us. So it's sad. But I think that's the nature. It will happen. It may be happening even to Sanskrit when it was going away.
No, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for getting that included in Final Draft. That's a very important intervention. Okay, so I'm going to ask some specific questions to each of you about your works. Maybe we can start with you, Kunal. And there's a new book that's just been out, Filmi Stories, which you call stories which are actually films in disguise. We'd love to hear more about the stories that you have here, because I think you've worked sort of backwards, where you've imagined the stories that you're writing in image and in film. So can you talk to us about that process?
We sometimes feel that when authors come to literary festivals and they speak, and then the audience is enriched, and the authors are not touched in any way. Filmi Stories actually happen in the obverse. A few years back, I was in a literary festival in Australia, and my co-panelist was an American writer of OTT content, and a very well-known person. And I won't name him now, but you must have seen some of his shows. And so he said during the session, in the future, people will not read novels anymore. They will watch novels. Okay? Because what does a novel do? It is characters, it is setting, it is a beginning, a middle, and an end, it is plots, it is subplots. And it's very hard, if it's a complex novel, to boil it down into 2 hours. Okay? Think about 100 Years of Solitude. Think about Anna Karenina. Incredibly difficult. But if you have a 10-episode season, and then if you have a second season and a third season, then you can pretty much do this, what he was saying. Okay? This is what, you can pretty much do what a novel does. And actually, viewers will read novels in that way. And obviously, as a novelist, it did not go down well with me. But then I thought, look, you have dance drama, okay? You've got opera, which is narrative and music. A lot of visual art today is performance art. In other words, the sibling arts have started to intermingle and collaborate with each other. So can I write fiction in a way? Can I write literature in a way so that when you read the words, in your mind's eye, you will watch a film? Okay? And because I was excited by cinema from a very early age, and because my writing is driven by imagery, I said, I'm going to write filmy stories. Okay? Because these stories are really films in disguise, as sometimes you've got films which are literature in disguise.
That's really interesting. Really looking forward to reading this. Thank you for sharing that. I'll move on to Vishalji.
And I have read all
Yeah.
those stories. They're
Okay.
beautiful.
Oh, amazing.
They are. I mean, it's a title to attract the person who is not interested in the stories.
Yeah.
So to say that you'll see a film, but there's a literature in it. Every story has such a deep, beautiful message and the mood.
No, it's really exciting. Thank you. Vishalji, sorry, I'm going to come back to Shakespeare because that is, I want to focus on that and your trilogy today. And I remember when I read Shakespeare, I remember feeling that it'll adapt perfectly to the Indian context. There's so much drama and tragedy and comedy. There's all the rasas that you would need, to sort of attract Indian audiences. And of course, you also saw that in Shakespeare in some ways. And of course, Shakespeare has been widely adapted around the world. And I wanted to understand from you what drew you to Shakespeare, what makes you think that Shakespeare is so timeless. And in fact, if you could also talk a little bit about your adaptations. There's also, Macbeth was converted also into a Malayalam adaptation recently, Joji, with the brilliant Fahad Fasil, which is also a great adaptation. So I wonder what you felt makes it so perfectly suited to the Indian context, and what was going through your mind when you picked these three particular plays, Macbeth, Othello, and Hamlet, for the Indian context.
I think it'll be unfair to go into that because we have a session which is called Shakespeare Wala at
fair
3
enough.
o'clock. Yeah, because otherwise I'll be repeating myself and the people will not come. But but still I'll save the details for that session. But I'll tell you briefly that the backdrop of the Shakespeare. I mean, I took the plot, but the backdrop was so original, and this is my the way I feel about the society and the politics of my own politics and the conditions we are living in. So I want to reflect that. So for that I need a plot, and I use that. Then this is how I started to look at Shakespeare's work. And slowly, when I went deeply into it, I figured out, how nuanced that writing was.
Thank you so much. I understand why you want to save some details for the next session. Okay, so I'll move on to Anu for now. And Anu, I want to come back to what we were talking about with your female characters, because I think now when I watch a show, even if I don't know you're involved, I'll know if the female character is written by you, because it's something really special that you bring to the kind of layers that exist in these female characters. Very strong female leads, but with many, many lives, with many tensions, conflicts that they're constantly dealing with. So I want to understand what your process of creating these characters, and are there certain portrayals that inspired you? Have you already seen that on screen before? Because I don't think I have. So have you seen that before, and what is your process of writing these?
We actually do come from a very, very beautiful legacy of very strong female characters, right from Bimal Roy to even Gulzar Saab. There's so many, and Vishal sir's female characters. So there is nothing special that I'm doing in that sense. Of course, all of these characters have stayed in all of us. If we are discerning readers and audiences, they do. But the one thing that actually, when I am given a responsibility of writing some female characters, the one particular thing that I'm looking for, I'm searching for, is that what is making that character resilient. In some sense, there is this very standard thing of hero's journey when you're writing the characters, and you have to look for, okay, what are the fears, what are the wounds. There's this very basic process and the template that everybody follows. You start from there because you asked about the process in particular. So that's where you start from. You begin to understand, you begin to look at the backstories. But the one thing that I am constantly looking for as an individual is that, as a woman, is that what is making this particular character resilient? Is that the want that she has? Is it coming from her marriage? Is it coming from the relationship? Is it coming from any personal space? Is it coming from a greater desire that she has? What is the bigger want that she has? And really, actually, I don't take any credit for any of these characters because they really are all around us. Look at, each one of us has this incredible story of resilience that we all know of our mothers, of aunts, our sisters, of friends, colleagues. We just have to borrow from there, and all I do is maybe just give it a structure, the structure that you have to follow in the process of character development. That's all that I do. The basic, I think, in terms of, like I was just telling one of our friends here who's in audience, he was talking about Scoop, and I said that I don't have much contribution. It already had a great lead writer and a great director. But what I can tell you is this: if you've seen this show, there's a Bindi sequence that's there. And whoever has seen Scoop, you must watch it. It was apparently trending at worldwide at #1. So that's my contribution. So that little thing, that's what I bring in from the experiences that I have had. So just these little things which are all around us. And that's it. Just keeping your eyes and ears open, and just be extremely grateful for the fact that we come from a culture of very, very strong, even from a mythology, very, very strong female archetypes. So let's just borrow from there and build from there.
Thank you for that. Vishalji, I'll come back to you and ask you also about your inspirations. We talked about your literary inspirations, but I also want to know about your filmy inspirations, where whom you draw inspiration from, whom you watched while growing up, or who were the people who inspired you to make the films that you make today.
Actually, my initial introduction to cinema was Bollywood, because at that time, only we used to get very few Hollywood films released in theaters. It was even before, the video cassettes came. So, and I wanted to be a composer, and I never wanted to be a filmmaker. I didn't know that I'll become a filmmaker one day. So it was all those, commercial films of that time, from Manmohan Desai to, Manoj Kumar, to everyone. All those films were my favorite films. And then later, when I grew up a bit, and I watched Guldar Saab's film, and I was in love with his poetry and the kind of songs he wrote. And from there, when I became a composer and I got my first break with him. So my journey as a filmmaker started from once I have achieved success as composer. And it was my first film, Marches. So I remember there was a film festival in Trivandrum, International Film Festival of India, IFI. And that time it used to travel to the various states. And I went there with Guldar Saab to take marches. I escorted him, and that's where accidentally I happened to watch Kieslowski and the Decalogue of Kieslowski, and that's where it opened my eyes. The cinema can affect you, and cinema can be such a beautiful thing on celluloid. I didn't know, and from there I started my journey, and then Kieslowski remained my basic source of inspiration as a filmmaker. And then, then polar opposite was Quentin Tarantino, and then, I loved his film, his sense of humor, his writing, his overtly, long scenes and talking about the burgers and the cheese. So, I had a very, very polar opposites, extreme taste in cinema. Then later I discovered Satyajit Ray and Ritvik Ghatak, and I think the one lifetime is very less to actually discover the whole cinema. Now, the kind of films you see in movie, or every year, you hear of a film, you see Tar, it's so many films, so many beautiful authorship is coming. And it's not that it's coming now. It has been coming. So I don't think that one can, stop getting inspired from the film and the filmmakers.
Can I please share just one little anecdote since we're talking about inspiration? I was a young mother, I was traveling in a flight, and there was this magazine I picked up, and it had an interview of Vishal sir. I don't remember who the person was. The journalist was, I think, Kaveri Bamzai, if I'm not wrong. But It was a very lovely essay that she had written, and in the beginning she writes about how she was waiting outside in the office for Vishal sir to come for the appointment, and he came a little late, and he apologized, and I'm paraphrasing, and he said that I'm sorry, but I was working. And then she asked if it was a new project that he was working on, and he said that no, I was watching a film. And watching a film is also a work for me. And that stayed so deeply with me. I was like, we have to protect our... This is indeed work. Reading and writing and watching great cinema is work. And as a mother, and I'm constantly just juggling between the two worlds and letting everybody else take away the time that one should be actually investing into enriching oneself. That stayed with me, and till now, the one thing that I'm very particular about is my watching time. So thank you, Vishal sir.
That's a really beautiful connection. Thank you, Anu. Kunal, I want to ask you the same question. Are you only the second bilingual author who writes both in Bangla and English?
So, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay in the 19th century wrote an English novel called Rajmohan's Wife. And then, obviously, the great works in Bengali. No other author in the 20th century has done so. So, yeah, it's a dubious distinction because my work should not be compared to Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's. I was fortunate that I grew up in a house full of books. My mother was a very well-known author, fiction, in Bengali, and my father was an independent publisher. And so we were a very bookish family, and our house was populated by authors, filmmakers, so Ray, Ghatak, Mrinal Sen, and others, filmmakers, theatre people, politicians. So the hothouse of Bengali intelligentsia. And I benefited from that because in my mind there was no partition between the art forms. Okay? To the extent that my first exposure to Bollywood was when I was a graduate student in the US. And obviously when you are in the US, you feel homesick. So I would go to visit other Indian students on a Saturday, and they would cook chicken curry, and on VCR tapes, they would play Bollywood films. Okay? And that was my introduction to Bollywood. And I said, my God, what have I been missing? Because this is also the fun part of cinema. Okay? And I remember when I was proposing to my wife, who is in the audience, and I had to confess to her that I never watched Sholay. And she had watched Sholay 15 times. So on that ground alone, my petition would have been disqualified. Okay? But I've remained an ardent viewer of what used to be called art cinema, but at the same time, popular cinema, although these distinctions seem to be blurring at the moment.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I just want to wrap up by asking each of you what you're currently working on and what we can look forward to, and then we'll open it up to audience Q&As. Whoever wants to go first, please feel free.
So I have completed two things. One film is for Netflix, original film called Khufia. It's based on a novel. It's a real-time, real-life event happened in 2004 where an officer of RNDW defected to CIA, and it's based on him. And the other thing I have just completed is Agatha Christie's. I have adapted Agatha Christie's novel, The Sitterford Mystery.
Amazing. We're really looking forward to both of those. Kunal, would you like
Well,
to...
this book, Filmi Stories, came out a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
And I've started work on what I think might be a novella, but which is set in the Himalayas.
Okay. Exciting. Anu?
As a writer, you're bound by NDA. But I will still try to. There's some releases which are hopefully coming this year. There is an adaptation of a Bangla film that I have written. The Bangla film is called Poshto, and the Hindi adaptation is called Shastri Viruddha Shastri. It's a family drama, family courtroom drama. In fact, it's a lovely story, bit of father-son relationship story. Then the other film that hopefully will release this year on Netflix is called Happy Teacher's Day, which I have co-written. Then there will be Arya 3, of course, that I've been a part of. I've had the good fortune of being a part of all seasons. And I will also be, I'm also in the writer's room of Delhi Crime Season 3. I don't know how many of you know about it. So yeah, some of these things.
And the Great Indian Kitchen.
And the Great Indian Kitchen, which will be called Mrs. In Hindi, and it'll be releasing hopefully in August, September. And also, I've just finished work on my novel, so hopefully that will also come here this year.
That's a lot of things. Thank you so much. That's fabulous. I'm going to open it up to audience Q&A. So if there's lots of hands going up. There was a first hand there. If you can just have.
Kunal sir, question for you. I know that you said you don't do translations, etc. I'm multilingual. I can do English, Hindi, Malayalam, Tamil, etc. So it doesn't help because my reading in English is much, much faster than my reading in any of these languages. You mentioned your mother being a Bengali author. Would you do the honor of like translating any of the works so that people like us could read? I mean, in a lot of Indian languages have beautiful books which is inaccessible to majority of Indians. Would you do the honor of like at least like from your mother's work, for example, or any Bengali?
Actually, my writing has my novels, Bengali novels, have started being translated into English. First one of them is out. The other three are under contract, so they should be coming out quite soon. It's a very sensitive question that you've raised. I mean, as a son, how can I say, I will never translate my mother? Okay. And although she's not with me, she's probably observing the British Library from somewhere up there and saying, what? Okay. So I'll give it a shot.
Thank you for that. There's one question here. Just behind you there. Yeah.
Hi, I have two short questions if you don't mind. Was it a conscious decision in any way to center your narratives around female characters? I would be very interested in knowing that. Or even rewriting them in a certain way, as you put it. And sir, I'm a huge fan not just of your films, but also of the way you sing. O Sathiri being one of my favorites. But my question is related to adaptations, if you may. We love the liberties that you've taken with, whether it is Shakespeare or Brecht. But is there also something, I mean, we always say this, that there's something that's lost in translation or in adaptation in one way or the other. Is there something that you also try to save in order to create that sense of belonging with the original author as well? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, it was a conscious decision. If we as women don't tell more women's stories, who else will? So, yeah.
Thank you, Anu.
Oh, yeah. Actually, you lose something when you are adapting someone's work, but then it becomes a question. What is important to you, and it's a very subjective thing. Then that what you want to say. Like now, when I look back at my work, I feel differently for various things that I could have. Maybe I could have done this. Maybe could I have done that. But that will remain with that's a human nature. It's never happy with what decision you take. What you don't take, you are always, regretting that.
Thank you so much. There's a question here and then here. And we'll keep the questions short so we can get as many in. Yeah.
Hello, sir. A question for Vishal, sir. Thank you so much, sir. It was a pleasure and honor to see you from such a short distance. One of the lifetime things. My question is regarding your movie, Heather. I'm not sure I'm going to get a chance to ask in the Shakespeare Wala session or not. I mean, the adaptation you did is like, I find it, no offense to anybody else's work, but it's the best adaptations I have seen, and I found it more engaging even than the original script, because the Kashmir backdrop you have created is the stroke of genius. And so I just want to say, what comes to your mind adopting to take the Kashmir as a backdrop for such a sensitive and special, I would say, important movie or a book, because Hamlet is like classic.
Yeah, so I'll give you the Bollywood version answer of this, because the Shakespeare version I'll save for the Shakespeare session. Yeah, so Bollywood version of this answer would be that, I was pained with my own community of filmmakers for not having made any film on Kashmir with reality. It was always seen from the outside point of view. Either a journalist will go inside or an army person will go and see the people with Firan and hiding AK-47 inside. So I thought the kind of human conflict, and such a tragic human conflict which has been going over there for now more than 30, 40 years now. And we as filmmakers, it becomes our responsibility. We are the we are the journalists of our times, and we have to reflect our times, and very honestly, even if it pains us, it pained me in various places when I was writing either, that whether to leave my the person who thinks otherwise as a countryman of this, should I be writing this dialogue or not? But then as a filmmaker, you have to go beyond boundaries. You have to go beyond languages. You have to go beyond yourself. Even whatever you think is right or wrong is a different thing. So this was the reason that I have been looking for a subject which I can place in Kashmir and talk about, not take a political stand, but what do you do when you make a film in Kashmir? You have to, however you try that, you won't take a political stand. It comes out in some of the subconscious manner, it comes out. But this was the reason, that to go and see the people see the inside out. What's the life of a person who is living in the bunkers and the shadows of AK-47s for all their life. And that's where, the Basharat Peer's book helped me, and I held his finger, and I went into Kashmir and felt the Kashmir the way it was shown.
That's amazing. Thank you. There was a question here. Yeah.
Hi. So Meera Sayar, when she won the awards at BAFTA, her Lifetime Award, she talks about representation, and she talks about people in front of the camera and people behind the camera, and how you can't have greater diversity unless people behind the camera look different, feel different. And so my question is around diversity and representation behind the room, and so how we're ensuring greater diversity, how are writers' rooms actually representing India, and then the other questions around creation and creativity. So how are you as creators going beyond just writing as a man, a female character, an upper caste, a Dalit character? How are you ensuring women write female characters? How are you ensuring Dalits write their own stories? How are we ensuring adaptations are not just about Shakespeare, but actually untold stories, which we don't hear anymore?
Thank you for that question.
This is actually something that requires a session of its own, really. I mean, I wish I could answer it so simply, but it is a very difficult one. And I think a couple of years ago, there was a survey that had come out. I think it was an Ormex survey of the representation of women, especially in Hindi cinema, in Bollywood as it is called, even though I have been gently reprimanded by Gulzar Saab in front of an audience of 1,000 people, that Bollywood is not the right word, but well, here we are. So basically, it's dismal. Writers, in fact, female writers actually are now about 15% of the entire workforce, screenwriters, whereas other technicians such as editors are better, I think about the same 12% to 10% to 12% range. But there are other aspects of filmmaking where their presence is very, very dismal. They're obviously higher, so things like costume and art, you will see many more women, but if you begin to talk to them, they will tell you that it has gotten better in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, there was very, very little representation behind the camera. We, of course, have very, very strong female directors also now. And not just female directors, very, very strong other different voices, different diverse voices coming in storytelling. However, it is work in progress, and we have to be conscious about this. I can speak for myself, I feel extremely, extremely guilty about writing Dalit character, for example. I feel like I've had enough privileges to, and maybe we should be looking for that writer who will actually bring in the authenticity. And it's a tough one. It's a constant negotiation because there's so many other aspects that you cannot control your producer to begin with. So, but it's a quest, and you just have to be at it with vengeance as much as possible. Bring in people from different languages, bring in people from different genders, sexualities, caste, creed, religion, all of that as much as possible. As much as possible, tell diverse stories. You need to have the courage that Vishal sir has. I hope we'll have the bunch of new writers and creators who will get there. But it's a long way. It's a long journey ahead.
Thank you, Anu. Would anyone like to come in on this? Or?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very important question, and like she rightly said, it requires another session for this. But I want to register one thing over here that to me, writers are genderless, writers are nationless, writers are casteless. You know, like I don't have to be a beggar to feel a beggar's pain. I don't have to go and beg. I don't have to be Dalit to feel Dalit's. In fact, I like that, you know, that I'm so privileged that I can at least write, I can feel the pain and translate that pain into some writing, give it an expression. But then the thing comes of, you know, honesty and not accepting your own mediocrity, not accepting your own cosmetic way of that life or of that pain. For that, you need to keep scratching yourself, keep scratching the layers that whether you're like in Kashmir. I had never been to Kashmir when I made Heather. In my whole life, I never went to Srinagar. But when I wanted to make that film, I caught a person who lived through those years of terrorism, and who from the age of 10 to 24 who lived through that pain. And I tried to be very, very close to feel that pain and felt Kashmir through it. So I'm not blowing my own trumpet, but I'm saying the writer within me, you know, he went for a writer, he has to go a very, very tough way, and he has to be very honest, and it's a very difficult path.
You know, I was doing a, a television interview in the US some years back with the public broadcasting channel. And the interviewer was razor sharp, really put me in a spot a number of times. And he said, Mr. Basu, you've written a novel about the opium trade in China, but you're not Chinese. I said, no. You've written a Mughal novel in the court of Akbar, and you're not a Muslim. I said, no. And you've now written a Victorian novel, and you're not even white. Do you think you own this world? And you know, at that very instant, my response was, yes, I do own this world. I own this world by my imagination, you know. And so, imagination and empathy are all that we have. And representational writing, this whole notion that only Dalits can write about Dalits, women can write about women, gays can write about gays, men can write about men, doesn't work when it comes to writing.
Yeah, we just have a final question. We can go ahead if we have time. We'll go.
Thank you so much, Vishal Saab. It's such a great pleasure listening to you. It's like a dream coming true. I'm from Pakistan. I'm a student of politics. So I wanted to ask you, you made films like Heather, and you know what is happening in India today, like as a student of politics, I see has already happened in Pakistan in the 80s. So how do you see, as a filmmaker, how the kind of politics which is shaping in contemporary India is impacting the filmmakers? It is like either is it putting some pressures on them to take up the subjects, the one you took in Heather, or the one, you know, such as Marches, Gulzar Saab's Marches. So that's one question. So how filmmakers and this community of artists are, you know, responding to that? And my question from you, Basu Saab, is that you briefly spoke about the division between art and commercial cinema, which is like there's always a debate that there is no such distinction. So can you say a little bit about that as well? Thank you.
I mean, again, it's a very complex discussion about is there a sort of boundary wall between art cinema and more popular cinema? I don't believe there is, actually. What would you call Charlie Chaplin's work? So art cinema is very popular cinema. And you know, if you talk about theatre, I mean, Brechtian plays. Look at Shakespeare. Shakespeare was performed to charm and excite and for people to enjoy, but it's great works of literature. So I don't actually see a hard and fast difference. Where I do see a difference, especially in India, is that especially my filmmaker friends say this, I'm not into films in that sense, is there used to be an organization, a government organization called NFDC, National Film Development Corporation. And so they would award films to filmmakers purely on artistic merit. This is how Shyam Benegal got to make his films. okay, and many others like him. Okay. Today, every decision to make a film has to pass through a very difficult sieve of commercial consideration. Okay. And in that regard, we are perhaps missing out on some very interesting films, which normally wouldn't be blockbusters. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes in case you want to wrap up, Vishalji, and then we can wrap up the session.
Asking.
Okay.
So we can answer for both.
We can just do it all very quickly. If we can quickly get to the question.
I'm a Czech retired doctor, and I wrote a novel in English 2 years ago. I'm just wondering, with the translations, you translating also the society. For example, the word interesting in English culture, interesting, when you're at the meeting and you say something and they say, that's interesting, that means don't even think about it. In my culture, in Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic, if they say interesting, they mean they would like to know more about it. And there are a lot of differences like this, and I wonder, how do you deal with these sort of cultural differences in your translation or putting?
I think first I'll answer his question. Then we'll all come together, because I think the language in each country has a different connotation. When we say interesting, what are we trying to say? That please don't pursue it anymore. Or I don't want to say no in your face, and still I don't want you to pursue it. But I think Kunal will give a better answer to this. Let me answer his question first. Yeah, of course, we are going through not just India. I think the whole world is going through a different phase. We never thought that this kind of these times will ever come back, and I hope when it completes its cycle, it takes longer to come back. So we are facing everywhere, not just in India. I think everywhere, but in India particularly, yes. We are pressured, and I won't shy away from saying that we have to be very cautious in choosing our films. In fact, now we don't even have to be cautious, because we don't get the money to the kind of films we want to make. So we don't have to be cautious in choosing our subject, because we won't get the money. So it's a very very different scenario. But I think it happens, and this too shall pass, and the films we are getting a lot of material on which we'll be making films later. This is the material for the future generation filmmakers to come. Yeah, we have every year we see film on the World War II, on the Gestapo, or and the concentration camps. Every year we see. So I think I'm jealous of the future filmmakers. They are going to get such good material we are leaving them with.
Thank you so much, Vishal sir.
So I'll just quickly answer.
Quick
yes.
Thoughts, yeah.
So very interestingly, interesting word is translated in Hindi/Urdu as dilchasp, which literally means something that tugs at your heart. So all you do when you're translating is that keep the context in mind. I mean, that's the simplest way to answer such a complex question of yours. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we'll wrap up here. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. But thank you for being here, and thank you to the panelists for such a wonderful discussion.